The bravest thing a man can do is finally let himself be loved the way he always deserved. Close your eyes for just a moment. I want you to imagine something. Imagine spending 35 years of your life being perfect. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect uniform, perfect answers at every dinner table, every family gathering, every first date that was never supposed to happen but happened anyway, because what else were you supposed to do? Imagine being the kind of man people look at and think he has everything, and imagine knowing, in the deepest, quietest, most locked away room of your chest, that you have nothing, not the thing that matters, not the one true thing. Now imagine one Tuesday morning, an ordinary Tuesday, coffee going cold in your hand, the smell of jet fuel and recycled airport air all around you. You hear something, a voice, not speaking, not calling your name, singing softly, almost to itself, the way a person sings when they think no one is listening. An old melody. Something European and aching and unbearably, almost painfully beautiful, and your whole body stops. Not your feet, your body, your heartbeat, the noise in your head that has been running at full volume for 30 years. Everything stops. And in that silence, the first real silence you have felt in your entire adult life, something wakes up inside you that you buried so deep, so carefully, so long ago, you had almost convinced yourself it never existed, Almost. This is the story of James Calloway, American airline pilot. I am 35 years old, and the day a man named Federico Castellani sang him back to life. The 5:47 a.m. alarm never surprised James Calloway. He was always already awake. He lay in the gray pre-dawn of his Chicago apartment with his eyes open and his arms flat at his sides, the way he always slept. Neat and contained, like a man bracing for impact, and he listened to the city below begin its slow mechanical exhale. Trucks a distant siren. A pigeon on the window ledge that had been coming back every morning for 3 years, as though it too had nowhere better to be. James reached over and silenced the alarm before it rang. 35, he thought. Today, he set it to the ceiling the way a man says something he's been practicing. Flat, controlled, his birthday. Not that he'd told anyone at work. Not that there was anyone waiting for him in the kitchen with coffee and sleepy eyes and that specific kind of warm, domestic disorder he had learned to stop imagining. He got up the way he always got up, efficiently, quietly, without ceremony, and stood in front of the bathroom mirror while the shower heated up. The face that looked back at him was objectively a good face. He knew that. He'd been told enough times. Strong jaw, dark eyes, the kind of straight nose that photographed well. Silver was just beginning to show at his temples, a fact that his captain's hat conveniently concealed. He was 6 feet even and kept himself in shape with the disciplined, joyless regularity of a man who understood maintenance. "You're so handsome, James," his mother. Every Christmas. "God, you're attractive." Rachel, his last girlfriend, said with such enthusiasm it had almost hurt. 2 years together. She had cried when he ended it. He had sat in his car for 40 minutes afterward, staring at his steering wheel, trying to feel worse about it. He hadn't been able to. Internal monologue. James, 35 years. 35 years, and you still can't look yourself in the eye for more than 3 seconds. Looked away from the mirror and turned. The shower too cold. The drive to O'Hare was 40 minutes of radio and silence. James drove the way he flew, hands at 10 and 2, speed consistent. Eyes moving in the precise pattern they'd trained him for. Scan, assess, correct. Scan, assess, correct. His co-pilot today was Danny Reyes, 29, perpetually caffeinated. He was waiting by the gate with 2 paper cups and the expression of a golden retriever who'd spotted a tennis ball. "Happy birthday, Captain Calloway." James stopped walking. "How did you know?" HR sends birthday emails. I'm in HR's contact list because of the incident with the Danny waved a hand. Doesn't matter here, he held out one of the cups. I got you that oat milk thing you pretend you don't like. James took the cup. He looked at it. Something warm moved briefly through his chest before he filed it away under professional appreciation. Thank you. Hey, big plans tonight? Please tell me you have big plans. You work too much. You need a person. A person. The phrase landed somewhere specific, like a fingertip pressed against a bruise. I have a flight to San Francisco at 7, James said. That's my plan. Danny made a sound that managed to be both sympathetic and judgmental. Captain, it is your birthday. The passengers don't know that. I know that. James walked toward the briefing room, and Danny fell into step beside him because Danny always fell into step with him. Because Danny, for reasons James had never fully interrogated, seemed to find his company genuinely enjoyable rather than merely tolerable. It was one of the more puzzling facts of James's life. You know what you need? Danny said, pulling open the door. Fuel reports and a weather brief. Someone who makes you laugh. Like really laugh. Not that thing you do where you almost smile. James sat down and opened his tablet. I almost smile all the time. Yeah, that's what I said. Chapter 3. Gate B12. The flight to San Francisco was straightforward. Clear skies, light turbulence over Denver. A smooth landing that earned brief applause from economy class, a sound James had long since stopped registering as anything other than confirmation of work correctly done. He had a 4-hour layover. Before the return flight, he changed out of his uniform in the crew lounge, pulled on a gray Henley and dark jeans, and went in search of coffee. And if the universe was feeling generous, 30 minutes of silence in a corner somewhere. The airport coffee bar near gate B12 was called Passaggio, Italian for passage, and it had the kind of warm lighting that was either deeply relaxing or deeply conspiratorial. James had been here before. The espresso was better than it had any right to be for an airport, he ordered. He paid. He carried his cup to a small table near the window that looked out over the tarmac, a habit. Watching planes, and he sat down and let out a long, quiet breath, the kind of breath that says, asterisk just for a minute. I am not performing anything. Asterisk. He wrapped both hands around his cup. Outside, a 777 was being pushed back from its gate. James watched it with the unsentimental affection of a craftsman watching someone else's work. Clean line. Good angle. He noticed the pilot had left the parking brake a half-second too long, a tiny thing, invisible to everyone else. He sipped his coffee, and then he heard. It wasn't loud, that was the first thing. It was barely more than a murmur, a man humming to himself at the counter. While he waited for his order, hands braced on the edge of the bar, shoulders slightly hunched in the way of someone carrying a weight they were pretending wasn't there. But the melody, asterisk. The melody, asterisk. James knew it. The way you know something that predates language, Schubert, Die Musik, to music, an old lie. A love song to music itself. Written by a man who believed that song was the only thing that could save a person from the gray cruelty of ordinary hours. The young man at the counter was singing it. So quietly it was almost entirely breath, but the pitch was flawless. The phrasing was, and James had no framework for this kind of recognition. No musical training, no vocabulary, heartbreaking. James did not move. Asterisk internal monologue. James, asterisk stop looking. You're staring. You don't stare. You don't, he stared. The man was perhaps 28, Italian. Something about the bone structure suggested, the dark curling hair that was slightly too long and slightly disheveled in a way that did not seem accidental. A face that was expressive even in repose, full mouth, heavy brows, eyes that James couldn't see yet, but that he felt, somehow, would be extraordinary. He was wearing a rumpled white dress shirt with the top 2 buttons open, dark trousers, and carrying a black leather portfolio case, the kind a musician would carry under one arm. His other hand was wrapped around a tiny espresso he'd apparently been handed while he was still mid-home, because he now raised it to his lips without looking at it, without stopping the melody. With the absent comfort of a man drinking something familiar in a place that was anything but. And then the barista said something. The young man looked up, laughed. A short, surprised sound, the melody stopped. The silence that followed was so abrupt, it felt like a room. Changing its mind, James realized he had been holding his breath. He let it out slowly, setting his cup down on the table with more care than the situation required. As though the small ceramic object was the only thing keeping him anchored to the floor. Asterisk, what was that? Asterisk, the question came from somewhere below. Thought. Below language. From the locked room? Asterisk, who is that? Asterisk, the young man collected his espresso and turned from the counter. His eyes, James had been right. They were extraordinary, dark and warm and slightly too wide. The eyes of a person who felt everything. Slightly more intensely than the average arrangement of sensation. A loud swept the cafe in the habitual way of someone looking for a safe place to land. They landed on James. For a single, unguarded second. Neither of them moved. James felt his chest do something he had not felt it do in so long he almost didn't recognize it. A kind of lifting. A readjustment of internal gravity. The young man looked away first. But as he turned toward the tables, his gaze drifted back just briefly. Just for a moment, and the corner of his mouth moved in the faintest shape of something uncertain and tentative. And not quite a smile. He sat down 2 tables away. James looked at his coffee. Asterisk. You're a 35-year-old. Commercial airline pilot. Asterisk, he told himself, in the brisk internal tone he used for pre-flight checklists. You are not going to fall apart because a stranger hummed Schubert. He lasted 6 minutes. Then, Schubert. The word came out of him before he'd authorized it. The young man looked up from his portfolio case, which he had opened and was frowning at, pencil tucked behind one ear. Sorry? His accent was there immediately. Italian, warm, the consonants a little softer than American English would make them. What you were humming? James gestured vaguely toward the counter. And Die Musik Schubert. The young man stared at him for a moment with an expression that was James catalogued it carefully, startled, and pleased and slightly mortified in equal measure. I was doing it again. He pressed a hand briefly to his face. My director says I do this. I hum when I am nervous, and I do not always realize. He looked up again, and now there was something genuinely apologetic and genuinely amused in his expression. Fighting each other for territory. I am sorry. Was it beautiful? James said. A pause. The young man blinked. James felt something warm climb the back of his neck. The pitch was... Technically, James Calloway. Master of disaster. But the young man, rather than looking alarmed at being addressed by a stranger with dubious social calibration, broke into a slow, wide, entirely unguarded smile. It transformed his face. It made him look younger and older at the same time, like someone remembering something they'd been trying to forget. Thank you, he said. That is, I needed that today, actually. James said. I'm James, Federico, the young man said. He tilted his head slightly, a movement that was entirely unself-conscious. You know Schubert? My mother played piano. She liked Lieder, mine too. Something moved across Federico's face, fawn, slightly sad. Small world. Sit down, James said. If you want. I don't. He stopped. Started again. You look like you could use someone to talk to. Federico looked at him for a long moment. Asterisk internal monologue. Federico? Asterisk. He is looking at me like he actually sees me. When was the last time someone looked at me like that? Don't be ridiculous. He is a stranger. Don't be an idiot, Federico. Don't yes, Federico said. Okay? Yes. He picked up his espresso and his leather portfolio and moved to James's table. And just like that, on James Calloway's 35th birthday, in an airport cafe called Sim Passaggio, with the smell of coffee in the air and a 777 outside, the window beginning its long taxi to the runway, something that had been locked for 35 years began, very quietly to open. Federico Castellani, James would learn in the next 2 hours, was 29 years old, born in Bologna, trained at the Conservatorio di Musica GB Martini, and currently in the process of convincing himself that flying to San Francisco to perform his American concert debut as a tenor with the Bay Area Lyric Opera was not. In fact, the single most terrifying thing a human being could voluntarily do, Federico said. Wrapping both hands around his second espresso, James had gone to the counter to get it for him without asking. And Federico had looked at him with an expression of quiet surprise. As though small acts of consideration were a language he'd forgotten he understood. Tamino. In the magic flute, Mozart. The one who has to prove himself worthy, James said. Federico pointed at him. Exactly. The one who must walk through fire and water and not make a sound. He smiled, but it had an edge to it. Very appropriate casting, my director says. Why? Federico looked at him over the rim of his cup. He seemed to be deciding something. Because he said, I am very good at being silent about things, he paused. Picked at the edge of his portfolio. Things that would complicate my career. James was quiet for a moment. Internal monologue. James, he means, is he saying don't make this about you? Don't project. Don't that sounds exhausting? James said carefully. Federico looked up sharply. Then his expression softened into something wry and a little sad and a little relieved all at once. Yes, he said. It is exactly that. They looked at each other outside. Another plane lifted from the runway, nose angling upward at that precise moment of commitment, the instant where the physics simply took over and there was no going back. I know something about that, James said. Very quietly, Federico nodded slowly. He seemed to understand, without needing the words filled in, exactly what James was not quite saying. And James felt, in the specific, rare way of two people accidentally finding the frequency the other is broadcasting on, that Federico understood it because he was broadcasting on the same one. How long have you been a pilot? Federico asked, navigating them back to safer ground with the gentleness of someone who knew when a silence had been enough. 12 years of commercials. 6 militaries before that? You look like a pilot. He tilted his head again. James was already cataloging that movement, already finding it unbearably endearing. Very controlled? Is that an insult? No. Federico's eyes crinkled at the corners. It is an observation. You hold everything very carefully, like you are always carrying something breakable. James opened his mouth. I closed it. That is also something I recognize, Federico said softly. They talked for an hour and 40 minutes, James, who had not voluntarily talked to a stranger for more than 10 minutes since approximately 2019, talked for an hour and 40 minutes. He did not entirely understand how this was happening. He was aware of it happening, the way you are aware of weather changing. A pressure difference. A shift in the quality of air, but he could not locate the mechanism of it. Could not reverse engineer. It's a specific alchemy of Federico's company that made the usual clenched interior of James Calloway begin, incrementally, to unclench. It was partly the way Federico listened, with his whole body slightly leaned forward, chin resting on one hand. Eyes steady and warm and completely present, not the performance of listening, but the actual thing. The rare and generously given thing. It was partly the way Federico talked. With his hands, with his face, with the entire animated vocabulary of a person who had never learned to edit himself in conversation. Or perhaps had learned to edit himself everywhere except in conversation. And this was what real Federico looked like. Unguarded and expressive, and occasionally so funny that James found himself laughing in a way that surprised him. Not the contained, polite sound he produced in professional contexts. An actual laugh. A laugh that made Danny's voice ring in his head *like, really laugh? *. And it was partly... James admitted this to exactly 0% of his conscious mind. The way Federico kept accidentally touching him. Not intentionally. Not even, probably, noticeably from the outside. But the table was small, and Federico talked with his hands. And twice those hands had brushed against James's forearm in the middle of making a point. And both times, Federico hadn't even paused, hadn't even seemed to register it. And James had felt each brief contact like a key turning in a lock he'd forgotten he had. Asterisk, stop it. The controlled part of his brain said. The rest of his brain was not listening. At some point the second hour, the cafe began to fill with the midday rush, Federico's portfolio. Case slid off the chair beside him and fell against the table leg. They both moved to catch it. Their hands met on the handle. They both froze. James looked down at their hands. Federico's was warm, the knuckles slightly ink-stained. He'd been making notes in a score, James had seen. The kind of hands that had been doing one specific, devoted thing for their entire existence. James pulled his hand back first. "Sorry," he said.
Oh no.
Federico picked up the case, tucked it more securely against his chair, and then looked up at James with a small, crooked, a slightly breathless smile that did things to the structural integrity of James Calloway's carefully maintained composure. "I should be more careful." "What's in it?" James asked, because asking about the portfolio was easier than asking about the other things. "My score. Tamino's arias." "I marked them." Federico unlatched it and opened it on the table between them. The pages were dense with handwritten annotations, arrows, breath marks, the occasional word underlined 3 times. Italian directions. Emotional cues. "I write everything I need to remember, to feel," he said it matter-of-factly without embarrassment. "Because in performance you cannot afford to think about feeling. You have to have already done all the thinking before you go on stage. Then on stage you just—" He made a gesture with one hand, a releasing motion, fingers opening outward. "Let it go." James looked at the annotated score. "Let it go." "That sounds impossible," he said. "Yes." Federico closed the portfolio gently. "It is very, very hard." He looked at James directly. "But when it works, when you have done all the preparation and the control and the careful maintenance, and then you finally let go of the control and just sing," he paused, and something in his face changed, went quiet and luminous in a way that made James's throat tighten. "There is nothing like it. There is nothing in the world like it." James was looking at him. He was definitely looking at him too long. Federico met his eyes, and for a moment, neither of them breathed. James, Federico said softly, like the word was a question. "Yes, can I ask you something?" "Yes." "When you are flying?" Federico leaned forward slightly, voice low. "Not the technical things, but the moment when the plane leaves the ground, the actual leaving. When there's nothing beneath you anymore?" His eyes searched James's face. "What does it feel like?" James was quiet for a long moment. No one had ever asked him that before. In 18 years of flying, in hundreds of dinners and first dates and family gatherings where the word pilot had produced reliable conversational warmth, the speeds, the altitudes, the dramatic weather stories, no one had ever asked him what it felt like to leave the ground. "Like the only moment," he said finally. "When I am not pretending to be anything," Federico's breath caught. "Just slightly. Just enough to notice." "Yes," he said. The word was barely a sound. "I know exactly what you mean." James's phone buzzed. A departure notification. The moment broke. They both looked at their phones. At the sudden return of time and itineraries and the ordinary world pressing itself back in around them, James's return flight. Gate B7. Boarding in 40 minutes. He looked up at Federico, who was looking at his own phone with the expression of a man being recalled from somewhere. "It's much better to somewhere significantly worse. I have to." James started. "Your flight," Federico said at the same time. They stopped. James pushed back his chair. He stood up. Federico stood too, automatically, which James found, filed under, "Things I am not examining," instantly charming. The old world courtesy of it. They stood facing each other across the small table with their coffee cups between them. And James felt the approaching goodbye with a physical weight he was entirely unprepared for. The sensation of something that had just barely opened, being forced shut again by the simple logistics of departure. "Your concert," James said. "When is it?"
Saturday. Federico's voice was careful, neutral, carefully neutral, which meant it was not neutral at all.
"At the War Memorial Opera House. That's a big venue."
I know.
A pause. "I am terrified." "You shouldn't be." James said it simply, without embellishment, because it was simply true. "You're extraordinary." Federico looked at him. Internal monologue, Federico. He is saying this because he means it. He is not saying it to be kind. He does not seem like a man who says things to be kind. He says things because they are true. I just met this man. I just met him. Why does this feel like remembering?" "You haven't heard me sing," Federico said. His voice was slightly unsteady. "I heard you at the counter," James said. Federico looked down at the table. Looked up. "You are going to make me cry in an airport, James Calloway. I'm a pilot. I've seen worse things happen in airports." Federico laughed, a real one, surprised out of him, and the sound of it hit James somewhere, around the sternum. They stood there for another moment. Then James did something he had not done in a very long time. Had not done perhaps ever in quite this way, without strategy or caution, or the three-step internal approval process he normally required for any action that carried emotional risk. He pulled a card from his wallet. His personal card, not the airline one, the small plain card with just his name and his number on it. The card he had printed 2 years ago for reasons he'd never quite clarified to himself. He held it out. Federico took it. I looked at it. "Looked up, if you want," James said, very carefully, "to tell me how it goes on Saturday." Federico turned the card over in his fingers, turned it back. "James." His voice was very soft. "I have been in America for 3 days, and I have not spoken to a single person who made me feel—" He stopped, pressed his lips together. "Who made me feel like I was allowed to be exactly who I am." James did not move. "I will text you," Federico said. "After Saturday?" "If that is yes," James said. "Immediately?" "Yes, that's..." He stopped. I tried again. "I'd like that." Federico smiled, the full one, the one that reorganized his face. He tucked the card carefully into the inside pocket of his jacket, close to his chest, and James watched him do it and did not look away. "Fly safely," Federico said. "Sing beautifully," James said. They stood there for one more second. Then James picked up his bag and walked toward gate B7 and did not look back. Not because he didn't want to, but because if he looked back, he was fairly certain he would not leave. Asterisk internal monologue. James asterisk, you are 35 years old. You are walking away from a stranger in an airport. This is normal. This is a completely normal experience that will have no lasting effect on your... His phone buzzed, an unknown San Francisco number. Text. Asterisk Federico Castellani. So you have it. Good flight. James. Asterisk James stopped walking. He stood in the middle of gate B, terminal, with people flowing around him on all sides, and he looked at that text and he felt something crack open in his chest, not painfully, not the way things usually feel, but the way ice breaks in spring, the way a window opens in a room that has been sealed for a very long time in the first cold. Clean air comes rushing in. He typed back, asterisk good luck on Saturday. I'll be thinking about you. Asterisk, he stared at it. He sent it. He walked to his gate. He smiled the entire way. Not the almost smile, the real one. The days between Tuesday and Saturday had a specific quality that James could not initially name, and then, by Thursday, reluctantly identified as wanting. He had not wanted something in a long time. He had wanted things in the abstract: better weather over the Rockies, a consistent barista at the crew lounge, Danny to stop singing pop songs during pre-flight checks, but this was specific and personal and entirely out of his control, which was the kind of wanting James Calloway had spent 35 years avoiding with the same principled discipline he applied to everything else. They texted. This was the other thing about the week. They texted. Not constantly. Federico was in rehearsals from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., And James had 2 Chicago, 2 Boston runs, and a red eye to Seattle. But in the margins. Early mornings, late nights, the quiet hours. I cannot get the second aria right, Federico texted at 11 p.m. on Wednesday. Asterisk, my director says I am singing beautifully and thinking too much. He says this is the same problem. Asterisk, asterisk sounds like someone I know, James wrote back. Ha, asterisk a pause. Asterisk, what are you doing right now? Asterisk, asterisk, sitting on my balcony, looking at the lake. Asterisk, asterisk, that sounds lonely. Asterisk, James looked at the lake. It was November dark and rippling faintly. City lights blurred in it like half-remembered things. It usually is, he typed. It doesn't feel like that tonight. The 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. No, Federico wrote. Me neither. Thursday night. 1:17 a.m. James was technically asleep, or in the condition he called sleep, which involved lying still in the dark with his eyes closed and his brain quietly, running maintenance cycles on everything he was choosing not to think about during daylight hours. His phone lit up. I should tell you something, Federico had written. James sat up. Asterisk, are you awake? He typed, yes. A long pause. I have not told many people about myself. But I am. I keep most of myself very private because in opera, you are the voice, the role, the performance. If you are also something that people have opinions about, if you are someone that some audiences or critics or companies decide is complicated, asterisk, another pause. Asterisk, I have worked very hard for this. I don't want anything to make it harder. Asterisk, James read the text twice. He held his phone in both hands in the dark of his bedroom and breathed very carefully. Asterisk, I understand that completely, he wrote. Asterisk, do you? Yes. James. Asterisk, the name alone, sitting there. I think you understand it in the same way that I do. The room was very quiet. Outside the city, the lake. The pigeon on the window ledge, improbably awake. Yes, James typed. Asterisk, I think I do. Asterisk, asterisk, I have never asterisk Federico started. Stopped. Started again. Asterisk, I have never told someone that I think we understand it in the same way. Asterisk, asterisk, neither have I. Asterisk, the 3 dots appeared. They stayed for a long time. Asterisk, how long? Federico wrote finally. James thought about the honest answer. He thought about the mirror in his Chicago bathroom and the shower on cold and the 35 years of performing the particular role of James Calloway. The one no one would have opinions about. The one who kept everything running smoothly. 35 years, he wrote. Oh, James. Just that. Just his name and the shape of compassion around it. His eyes were doing something they hadn't done in a very long time. He pressed his fingers to them briefly. My whole life, he wrote. Asterisk, I have been the most controlled person in every room. Asterisk, asterisk, I know. Asterisk, Federico wrote. Asterisk, I could see it. Even across a cafe table. All that careful carrying, asterisk, asterisk, and you, James wrote me. A long pause. Asterisk, since I was 17. Since I heard my first Britain opera and understood this music was written by someone like me, for someone like me. And everything in me went, oh yes, that must have been something. It was terrifying, asterisk, Federico wrote. Asterisk, and wonderful. And then I got very good at being silent about it. Until you sing? Yes, until I sing. Asterisk, a pause. Asterisk, James, when I sing who I am, everything I keep quiet, it is all in the voice. You cannot hide in music. Not real music. You can try, but the voice always tells the truth. That's why you were so nervous at the airport. Yes, because Saturday, this stage, this audience, I will be completely visible. Everything I am. And I am not sure I am ready to be that scene. Asterisk, James read this and understood it. Understood it in the way of something pressing precisely against a corresponding shape in himself, fitting perfectly. The specific relief of recognition. I think you're ready, he typed. I think you've been ready for a long time. Another long pause. Come, Frederico wrote. Asterisk what? Asterisk, come to the concert. Saturday, I will leave a ticket for you. James sat in the dark. Internal monologue. James, asterisk, you have a Chicago to San Francisco flight Saturday morning. You could. The concert is at 8. You could be there. You could asterisk you were asking me to fly to San Francisco to watch you perform. He wrote, asterisk, yes. On 3 days' notice? Yes, Frederico. I know it is asterisk, I'll be there. James wrote, the 3 dots appeared immediately. Asterisk? Really? Asterisk. I'm already looking at flights. Asterisk a pause. Then asterisk, you're the most surprising man. Asterisk, you have no idea. James wrote, and smiled at his phone in the dark of his apartment, and felt something that had been wound so tight for so long begin, very slowly, to unwind. He took the 7 a.m. Saturday flight. Not as a crew, he had the weekend off, had not even had to rearrange anything, which he chose to interpret as the universe. Providing unusually clear runway conditions, the city met. Him with November fog and the smell of the bay and that particular San Francisco light that seemed to come from all directions at once, soft and impartial. He checked into a hotel near the Opera House, changed into the one good suit he'd packed, dark charcoal, white shirt, no tie. Danny would have opinions, and texted Frederico. I'm here. The response came fast. Oh, thank God. Then, asterisk. Sorry, that was I am extremely nervous. Asterisk, I know. You're going to be extraordinary. You keep saying that. You keep giving me reasons. Asterisk a pause. Asterisk James, I would like to see you before. Is that, can you come backstage? I can leave your name at the door. James looked out his hotel window at the gray, beautiful city. Tell me where. He wrote, the War Memorial Opera House was the kind of building that took itself seriously, Beaux-Arts grandeur. The weight of decades of music in its stones, and backstage was a different world entirely. Concrete corridors. Warm, bright makeup lights. The smell of grease paint and starched costumes, and the specific nervous energy of 100 people collectively daring themselves. James found Frederico in a small dressing room at the end of a corridor. The door was half open. He knocked. Avanti. He pushed the door open. Frederico was sitting at the makeup mirror in his Tamino costume, the 18th century princely getup that should have looked absurd and instead looked, on him, simply inevitable. He was staring at his own reflection with an expression of such concentrated anxiety that he hadn't registered who'd come in. James said softly. Frederico spun around. For a moment, he just looked at James. His eyes went wide and bright, and then James watched this happen, this specific, unguarded, helpless movement. His face went completely soft. You came, Frederico said. I said I would. I know, but He stopped. He turned back to the mirror and pressed both hands flat against the table, taking a breath. I thought perhaps you would, that you had time to reconsider. And Frederico. James crossed the room and sat down in the chair beside him, facing him. Look at me. Frederico turned. Their knees almost touched. James looked at him, the costume, the makeup that emphasized the already expressive contours of his face, the hands that were shaking slightly against the table, and felt a tenderness so acute it was almost physical pain. You are about to walk out onto one of the great opera stages in America, James said, and sing music that a genius wrote 250 years ago, in a language you've spoken since childhood, in a role you've been preparing for years. You have done every single thing right. You have done the preparation and the control and the careful maintenance. He paused. Now you get to let go. Frederico looked at him. His hands, James noticed, had stopped shaking. You remembered that? Frederico said softly. I remember everything you say. A beat of silence that had the particular quality of a held note sustained. Trembling slightly, resolving toward something, Frederico reached over and very deliberately straightened the lapel of James's jacket. His fingers lingered for just a moment on the fabric. James did not move. "I am going to think about you," Federico said quietly. "When I walk out there, I am going to think about what you said. About the plane leaving the ground. It's a moment when you're not pretending to be anything." "Yes," Federico smiled, not the full one, a smaller one, private and warm. "That is what I am going to carry out there with me." James looked at him for a long, steady moment. "Then go knock them flat," he said. Federico laughed, and the laugh was the sound of someone who had just put down something very heavy. He stood up. He straightened his costume. He looked at James one more time, a look that James would replay over and over in the coming days, trying to find exactly the right word for it and failing, because the right word didn't exist in English. And then he walked out the door. James found his seat in the third row. He had never been to a live opera before. He had listened to recordings occasionally, in the way of someone who suspects there is a whole world on the other side of a door they've never quite been brave enough to open. He had heard his mother's piano leader. He had heard Federico hum for bars of Schubert in an airport cafe. Nothing had prepared him for this. The moment Federico walked onto the stage, straight-backed, eyes forward, the stage lights catching, the dark curl of his hair, the audience settled into the kind of quiet that is its own kind of sound, anticipatory, receptive. And then Federico opened his mouth and sang "Dies Bildnis ist bezaubernd schön." This image is enchantingly beautiful. Tamino's first aria, falling in love with a portrait. Not knowing yet whether the person he loves is real, James sat very still. He knew technically what a tenor voice was. He knew the range, the physics of it, the way the resonant chambers of a body could produce sound that carried to the back of a 1,000-seat hall without amplification. He knew all of this the way he knew aerodynamics, as information, as framework. As the correctly assembled understanding of a thing, what he did not know, what no amount of information could have prepared him for, was what it felt like to hear this specific voice. This voice, fill the air of an enormous room, was something so completely itself, so unhidden, so entirely and unflinchingly true, that every person in the audience seemed to lean slightly forward at the same moment, as though the music was a gravitational body. Internal monologue, James. This is what he meant. You can't hide in music. He is completely visible right now. He is every single thing he kept quiet and controlled and carefully carried. He is all of it right now, right here, and it is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Somewhere in the second act, Tamino must walk through fire and water as a test of worthiness. He must not speak, must not cry out, must not reach for the person he loves, even when every instinct demands it. He must trust that the silence is temporary, that the trial ends, that love is on the other side. James watched Federico walk through the fire. He understood, the clarity that was almost physical, that he had been walking through fire for 35 years, and that maybe he was nearly through. The curtain fell. The applause was enormous, immediate, the sound of an entire house of people releasing their breath. James stood. He didn't decide to. He simply stood, because sitting was no longer something his body knew how to do. The dressing room. Corridor backstage was chaotic after the performance, cast members embracing, flowers being passed, the director moving from person to person, with the manic energy of post-performance relief. James stood near the wall with 2 cups of water from the catering table, holding them both. Waiting, he heard Federico before he saw him. His voice stripped now of its operatic projection, back to its natural warm-speaking register with the Italian cadence coming down the corridor, responding in gracious Italian to a cascade of compliments from what appeared to be an entire section of the San Francisco Italian-American community who had somehow gotten backstage and were now trying to collectively embrace him. James watched him navigate it. Warm, generous, patient, the smile genuine but the eyes moving through the crowd. Searching, they found James, and then Federico smiled in a different way. The way that was just for James, the one James had been cataloging since Tuesday. The one he now knew had a distinct quality from every other smile. Direct. Unguarded, slightly too bright to be entirely dignified. And entirely, completely real. He extracted himself from the Italian-American, contingent with impressive diplomatic skill, and crossed the corridor. He was still in costume. Still wearing stage makeup, and he looked simultaneously like a prince from a fairy. Tale and like a 29-year-old, who needed to sit down for approximately 72 hours. You stayed, he said. Of course I stayed. How was he stopped? He was looking at James's face. Oh, he said softly. Okay? Yeah, James said. His voice was not entirely steady. Federico took one of the water cups from his hand, and in the process of taking it, his hand wrapped around James's briefly. Not accidentally. Not this time. Deliberately, gently, for just a moment. James looked down at their hands. Come, Federico said. I need to change. Then I want to eat approximately everything in San Francisco, and I want you to tell me what you thought. I told you what I thought. James said. You cried. I didn't cry. James, I could see you from the stage. The lighting was unusual. Federico looked at him with a fond, helpless expression. You are the most stubborn man. I'm a pilot. Stubbornness is a professional requirement. Come, Federico said again, and turned toward the dressing room, and James followed him. Because following him was the most natural thing in the world, they found a place near the waterfront, small, Italian, with candles and wine bottles and a proprietor who seemed personally offended by the idea of anyone eating a small meal. They sat at a corner table, and Federico, who had still not entirely come down from the specific biochemistry of performance, was James observed with quiet delight. Absolutely irrepressible. He ordered for both of them in a rapid mix of Italian and English that left the waiter smiling. He drank his wine with enormous appreciation. He talked about the performance with the specific analytical clarity of a craftsman immediately post-work what had worked, what he wanted to improve, the second tenor who had come in early in the Act 2 finale, and how he had adjusted. And then, mid-sentence about the second tenor, he stopped. I'm talking too much, he said. No, James said. I like it. Federico looked at him. You like it? I like hearing from you, James said it simply. You talk about music the way I talk about flying, when I actually let myself talk about it. Like it's the only thing that makes complete sense. Federico was quiet for a moment, under the table. His knee pressed very lightly against James's. Nice. Neither of them moved away. Tell me, Federico said softly. Tell me about flying. The way it actually is. So James did. He really talked, the way he had not talked to anyone in longer than he could accurately recall, about the pre-dawn drives to the airport and the specific quality of silence at altitude. The way a clear day over the Rockies looks from 38,000 feet. The cumulus towers in summer that build like cathedrals you have to navigate around. He talked about the passengers he thought about sometimes. Not their faces, but their purposes. The human weight of everyone on the plane going somewhere that mattered to them. He talked about the moment of takeoff. The ground gave way. Federico listened with his whole face, the way he always did. And at some point, neither of them could have said exactly when, his hand found James's on the table. I just rested there. Easy as though it had been there before. James turned his hand over. Hold it back. Internal monologue, James. This is the simplest thing. This is the most ordinary thing. A hand, a table, a candle. How long have I been afraid of this? How long have I been carrying that lock? Look how easy this is. Look how he looked at Federico. Federico was looking at their hands on the table. His jaw was set at an angle that James had learned meant he was managing an emotion he didn't entirely want to manage. Federico, James said. I know, Federico said, voice low. I know this is. We have known each other for days counting the texts, 5, James said. If you count from Tuesday, Federico looked up. His eyes were bright. 5, he conceded. I've known myself for 35 years, James said, and done nothing with it. I don't think time is the relevant variable. Frederico's mouth curved. That is the most pilot thing anyone has ever said to me. Going to take that as a compliment? Was? Frederico's hand tightened slightly on James's. James, I have another month in San Francisco. Before I go back to Bologna for the winter. James looked at him. And then, Frederico continued, carefully, like a man stating coordinates. In the spring, I have a production in New York. For months. New York is 45 minutes from Chicago by the schedule I fly. Frederico blinked. Then, is it? It is. That is, his voice was doing the unsteady thing again. That is a very specific piece of information to have. I'm a detail-oriented person, Frederico laughed. The surprised, helpless kind, and James grinned. The full one. The one Danny had only seen in approximation, and the restaurant was warm and candlelit. And outside the bay was dark and enormous and full of its own kind of flight. They walked after. Dinner San Francisco at night had an extraordinary quality of light, the fog diffusing everything into soft halos, the hills dropping away toward water that caught the city's glow and gave it back transformed. They walked along the waterfront, not talking much, and James was aware of the particular luxury of companionable silence, the kind that only exists between people who have already said enough, true things to each other to not need to fill every breath at some point. Frederico stopped walking. James stopped too. I want to tell you something, Frederico said. He was looking out at the water. Something I have thought about all week. Okay, James said. In Bologna, when I was very young, 17, 18, I used to walk home from the conservatory at night along the Via dell'Indipendenza, and I would sing to myself, quietly, like at the airport. And sometimes someone passing by would stop and look at me, the way you looked at me. He paused, and every time I would stop, I would close it off, because being heard felt too dangerous. He turned to look at James, but at the airport he said, when I heard you say Schubert, when I heard you recognize it, I did not feel afraid. For the first time, I felt he searched for the word. Found. James looked at him in the fog-blurred light. I know that word, James said quietly. I know you do. James took a step toward him. Just one. Closing the careful, polite, public space distance between them to the smaller, warmer, specific distance of intention. Can I? James started. Yes, Frederico said. Immediately before James had finished the sentence, James's hand came up, slowly and curved against the side of Frederico's face. Frederico's eyes closed briefly, and James felt the slight lean into his palm, involuntary, instinctive. The response of someone who has been carefully self-contained for a long time to the specific relief of being held. Frederico, James said softly. I'm going to tell you something I have never told anyone. Frederico opened his eyes. James looked at him steadily, in the way of a man who has finally found the frequency in his choosing, for the first time in his life, to transmit clearly. I am 35 years old, James said. And for 35 years I have been flying planes and performing perfectly and keeping everything exactly right. And I have been doing all of it completely alone. And I was fine with that because I didn't know. He stopped, steadied. I didn't know it could feel like this. Frederico's hand came up and covered James's where it rested against his cheek. Like what? He said softly. Like I can finally put something down, James said. Frederico stepped in, and James's arm went around him naturally, easily, the way things move when the physics of a situation simply take over, and then they were standing close together in the fog and the lights of San Francisco with Frederico's forehead pressed lightly against James's, both of them breathing. Both of them, absurdly, terrifyingly, genuinely here. 35 years, Frederico murmured. And it took an airport. And Schubert, James said. And Schubert, Frederico agreed. And James, who had spent 35 years performing the precise role of a man with nothing to hide, kissed him softly, carefully, with the specific tender gravity of a first time that is also somehow unmistakably a homecoming. And Federico kissed him back, with warmth and relief and the specific eloquence of a man who has been singing truth in music for years and is finally saying it in his own voice. The fog moved around them. The bay murmured below. Somewhere, a distant plane climbed into the night sky, banking west over the water, its lights blinking in the dark. James watched it over Federico's shoulder. He felt the ground give way. He didn't catch himself. For the first time in 35 years, he let himself fall. He was not a man given to grand gestures or dramatic declarations. He was organized, methodical, a creature of pre-flight checklists and fuel calculations, and the disciplined management of variables. He woke up Sunday morning in his San Francisco hotel room, with sunlight coming through the curtains and Federico's voice coming through the wall from the next room. He had booked a room in the same hotel, another detail that had been attended to with the quiet efficiency of a man who had apparently decided to be absolutely clear about his intentions, and Federico was humming. Schubert again, the same phrase. The one from the airport. James lay very still and listened to it. Then he picked up his phone. Asterisk, good morning. He texted. The humming stopped. A pause. Good morning, Federico texted back. Asterisk, I can hear the silence when you stop smiling. Asterisk, asterisk. That is a ridiculous statement. Asterisk, asterisk. It is completely true, and you know it. Asterisk. James was smiling. He stared at the ceiling. Asterisk internal monologue. James asterisk. So this is it. This is what this is. This person on the other side of that wall, who hums Schubert in the morning and sees through every careful performance you've ever given, and makes you laugh with your whole chest and holds your hand at a candlelit table like it's the most natural thing in the world, and has been carrying the same secret for the same lonely years. This is what was on the other side of the lock, felt, in a way that was entirely new and slightly overwhelming and absolutely real, grateful. Grateful for Tuesday, for the counter at Passaggio, for the particular stubborn luck of choosing. Gate B12 for coffee on his birthday. He got up. He showered warm this time. He dressed. He went and knocked on the next door. Federico answered it in a rumpled, white hotel robe, with his hair entirely ridiculous, and an expression of delighted and slightly embarrassed surprise. And James, who had spent 35 years perfecting the controlled, measured smile, looked at him and grinned so fully and so helplessly that Federico covered his face with both hands and laughed. Don't look at me, Federico said. I look like a… What is the word? You look great, James said. You are a liar. Come to breakfast. Federico lowered his hands. I need 10 minutes. I'll wait. Federico looked at him with that expression James had no single word for. The one that lives somewhere between wonder and recognition. You'll wait, he repeated softly, like he was testing the weight of it. Federico. James leaned against the doorframe. I have waited 35 years. I can wait 10 minutes. Federico's face did the thing, the full transformation, the smile that reorganized everything, and he grabbed James by the lapel and kissed him once, quickly, warmly, then stepped back into his room to get dressed. James stood in the hotel corridor. He was 35 years old. He had a flight back to Chicago this afternoon. He had a co-pilot who would want to hear everything, and a mother who still didn't know anything, and a whole complicated ordinary life waiting to be renegotiated, restructured, brought into alignment with the truth. He was aware of this, was choosing to be clear-eyed about it. A lot of work ahead. Not the performing kind, the real kind. The terrifying, necessary, one conversation, at time kind. But right now, in a San Francisco hotel corridor on a November Sunday with the sun coming through the window at the end of the hall and Federico on the other side of the wall doing something that involved a hairdryer and some Italian muttering, James Calloway felt lighter than he had felt since he was a child. Not empty lighter. Full dash lighter, the way a plane feels. When it leaves the ground, the month in San Francisco was not enough. It was never going to be enough. But it was everything. James flew back 6 more times on his off weekends. Once on a Tuesday he'd originally scheduled as a rest day, which Danny Reyes noted with barely contained glee when James mentioned it during a pre-flight brief. "So," Danny said, studying the fuel report with excessive focus. "San Francisco again?" "Yes." "Any particular reason?" "Yes." "You going to tell me?" "Not yet." Danny looked up. He looked at James's face. He looked back at the fuel report. "Okay," Danny said calmly. "That's okay then. Is he nice?" James paused. "Yes," he said. Danny's entire face broke into a smile of such uncomplicated joy that James felt something in his chest respond to it instantly. "Good," Danny said. "Good, okay. Fuel looks fine, Captain. Thank you, Danny." "No problem." They did not speak of it again that day. They did not need to. Certain things James was learning did not require elaborate language. They required only the simple, radical act of telling the truth. He told his mother 2 weeks later on the phone. While sitting on his balcony watching the lake, the silence on the other end was long enough that he thought the call might have dropped. Then, James Michael Calloway. Her voice. "How long?" "A long time." Another silence. "Is he kind?" she said. "This person?" James thought about how to describe Federico Castellani. The hands, the coffee, the humming, the full transforming smile. The way he listened with his whole body. The voice that could fill a concert hall and had once in an airport cafe. Stopped a pilot in his tracks and unlocked 35 years of careful silence. "He's extraordinary, Mom." She cried a little. He cried a little. They spoke for an hour. Afterward, James sat in the dark with his phone in his hand, the city going about its enormous ordinary business below. And he breathed. And he texted Federico, "I told my mom." The response was immediate. "James." Then, asterisk, "How was it?" Asterisk, asterisk, "Good. She wants to meet you?" Asterisk, a pause. Then a series of messages in rapid succession that James read with growing amusement.